give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation tonight is Ceylon coffee, and with us we have Kushan Samararatne, who is the chairman of Lanka Coffee Association. Kushan, it's very nice to have you on the show with us.
Absolutely, and thank you, Ruwandi, for the opportunity given to talk about coffee as well in Sri Lanka, something that we don't discuss every day, right? We discuss a lot about tea, but not about coffee, so thank you for the opportunity.
To start off our discussion, Sri Lanka is historically known to be a tea nation and we are branded that way. However, we are seeing the coffee industry making a comeback. Against this backdrop, can you give us an idea and an overview of the prevailing state of the coffee industry in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think I'll actually start with the history, Ruwandi, because that adds a lot of value to this conversation. Because most of the people does not know that we used to be one of the top 3 nations in the world in the 1850s to the 1870s when it comes to exporting coffee, right? We were one of the largest countries in the world, the 3rd largest exporter at one point, right? And then only everything, as you said, got wiped out with the rust disease that came in. Then, of course, tea came in, tea survived, and tea thrived. Right? But over the last few years, we have actually seen a very good interest for Sri Lankan coffee, both locally as well as internationally. So the international market is still small for Sri Lanka, but the local market has actually picked up quite a lot. And the good thing is we see a lot of cafes coming up, a lot of people moving towards coffee, especially the Gen Zs. Right? We were raised in a very much of a tea culture, but now the newer generations, we have actually seen them moving into coffee quite a lot. And that's why we see a lot of cafes opening up and a lot of interest towards Sri Lankan coffee as well. So of course, we have a lot of other coffees, imported from different countries, famous brands. But the interest for Sri Lankan coffee has also been quite overwhelming over the last few years. So that's a really positive sign to see.
Like you said, Ceylon coffee, it sounds really interesting. But we don't know too much about the technicalities here. Can you take us through what exactly Ceylon coffee is like in terms of the taste, the texture, the flavor profiles?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, the normal flavor profiles that we get is more towards the spicy, nutty, sometimes fruity sort of a flavor profile. Again, it depends on where you are getting your coffee from, what sort of elevations, what sort of the temperature patterns are there, what sort of soil content or the soil mixture is there. So it depends on those, but those are like the normal profiles that we get. But interestingly, Ruwandi, we sent a sample to MICE. This is the Melbourne International Coffee Expo. So like not just a sample, like we sent some of our coffees over there in 2022. And most of the people who cupped it, so there's a term called cupping, which is like how you identify how good a coffee is. They actually came back and said there's a distinct or a very unusual citrusy note that you don't even find in other countries of Southeast Asia. So it's something that is very unique, more like an orange flavor. That's the exact term that they came back. So I think, again, these were like, micro samples that were done specifically for this exhibition. But of course, what it tells is that if we do this correctly, there's distinct or unique flavor profiles that we can extract from Sri Lankan coffee.
In Sri Lanka, coffee is not a crop that we see in large volumes. So it's more of a specialty crop, if you would say. So can you take us through the cultivation aspects a little bit? Also touching on how our weather patterns and of course all this climate change that we are undergoing, how they are also impacting the cultivation.
Yeah, so the coffee model so far, Ruwandi, in Sri Lanka is actually centered around the smallholder farmer. So like every household, especially upcountry. So when we talk about Arabica coffee, it's mainly grown in the higher elevations, like 600 meter plus or ideally 900 meter plus. So what we've seen is that every household, there's like, 50, 70, 100 trees, right? it pays into two parts. So one is on a very positive note. Look, there's a lot of coffee that's, smallholder farmer can actually give. And that model is very nice. But of course, we've seen some of the negatives of that as well, because the farmer sometimes does not understand the concepts of quality. No matter how much we try and convince them, educate them, they are sometimes more concerned towards, hey, how can I make a quick buck? Right? Which is fair by them, because coffee for them is more like a bonus product. It's not the main product. They might do cinnamon as the main product, coffee as a side product, or tea, or ginger as the main, or pepper as the main, and coffee as a side product. So it has its pluses and negatives, but the model right now, so far, is actually centered around the smallholder farmer itself. But over the last couple of years, we have actually seen a shift happening. So a lot of the plantation companies actually have started diversifying their business. Most of these plantation companies used to be tea only, but I think they've understood as well that tea by itself will not be good enough for them to sustain their business for the longer run. So they have started diversifying. And one of the easier products to diversify into is, of course, coffee, right? I mean, most of our lands were coffee lands back in the day. So you have tea today. So our soil textures to the weather conditions, everything kind of impacts or helps us to achieve good results in coffee. So a lot of the plantation companies actually have started investing, diversifying into coffee as well. So that's a very good sign to see, because what that will do is, when we do this with plantation companies, they have a better control over their labor, right? Individual farmer, you can only educate them. You can't force them to pluck only the red cherry. Right? You can't do that. It's their tree, right? They will decide what they want to do. But when we think about the plantation companies, they have a bigger control over their laborers. So they can say, hey, only pick the red cherry. We are paying you to pick the red cherry only. So they have that control, which in the long run will be very useful for Sri Lanka. Because as you correctly said, look, our volumes are not going to be as big as Brazil or Indonesia or Vietnam, right? And given the labor context, labor charges that we have today, and all the other extra costs that we have, utilities to everything, we won't be able to compete effectively on a very commercial level coffee. So we have to think about specialty layers where pricing still matters, but pricing is not the main factor. Right? They will look at the hopping score, they will look at the elevation, they will look at the roast profiles, the taste profiles that are generated from those. And those would be the main factors. So we can sort of take the whole, the limitations of pricing, and of course the volume as well. Look, Sri Lanka is a small country, right? Even if you put everything into coffee, you're still going to be a small country compared to some of the bigger nations that are there, right? So I think it's important that we understand that as well. And talking about the climate change, that has actually been a huge impact for the coffee industry as well, especially the last harvesting season, because we had a drought period, and then a completely rainy season, and now we are again in a drought season, right? So that's not great for coffee. I mean, if you look at the volumes in 2022 and 2023, what we've seen is about a 60% drop of volume in 2023 compared to 2022. Because we had a huge drought season where the flowering did not happen, and then rain started, flowers did come, but it was very heavy rainfall, and then the flowers got destroyed again. So like, a massive impact with the climate change as well, which is something that we have to be very mindful of as we move along, because if this trend continues, then it's not going to be good for Sri Lankan coffee at all, because the prices keeps on going up. I mean, there is a huge supply and a demand gap at the moment. The demand is so high. In a way, it's good for the farmer because they can fetch a good price, but it's not sustainable, right? We have to look at how to sustain a business. So in that sense, I think, the climate change is impacting the coffee industry in Sri Lanka as well quite a bit.
You spoke of labor. I want to ask you, how are the labor market dynamics of Sri Lanka impacting the coffee industry, and how can we really get more people to be involved in the industry?
Yeah, so Ruwandi, I think that's the bit. I mean, that's a very nice story about coffee, right? Because on a regular basis, coffee actually does not need a lot of labor. So what we recommend is, like, for 1 acre, have about maximum 2 employees only on a regular basis. Again, if your terrain is a little flat, you can even go like 1 to 1, right? So 1 acre, you just have 1, or even 2 acres, you can have 1 on a regular basis, right? On the harvesting season, of course, you need more people, but that's where you get the contract workers, or, the daily wage workers come in and do this. So even in terms of the labor issues that Sri Lanka are currently going through, compared to tea, coffee is a lot less labor intensive, right? So that's a very good part. But again, those issues are there, right? I think it's more important that it's not just the laborers, but the trained laborers or people who have an expertise or an experience on this that needs to be in this industry. Because when we talk about the coffee quality, the first point you can ruin this is at plucking, right? So instead of what we see today is so we suggest or we recommend to pluck only the red cherry. But today we see everyone, the moment they see three red cherries in a stem, they just go swoosh, take everything out. Not pluck, not just the red cherries, not even pluck, just go, take everything out, right? Rip it off. So it kind of, kills the quality at that point itself, right? So after that, there are certain, steps on the value chain, but you can't recover the quality that you lost, right? The roaster can't recover a mistake that was done at the plucking point. A processor cannot recover the quality loss that happened at a picking level, right? So it's important that everyone has that understanding, that education as well, and understand why we are saying only pick the red cherries. Because if you are going into that specialty market, it's critical that you only pluck the red cherry, and that's the base point where it starts, right? So I think again, not just some laborers, but people who have an understanding, who understands the value of plucking the correct cherry and of course processing it in a nice manner as well, like a proper manner.
Like you mentioned, cultivation is one thing, plantation is one thing, and then we have a whole other process of roasting and post-harvest activities in general. How do these activities influence the quality of coffee, the final cup?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main point is, look, the first part is actually the plucking of the cherry. But after that, it goes into the processor. So the processor can ruin it as well. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, there are three main processors that we use at the moment. So we have the dry processing, the wet processing, as well as the honey processing. Now, dry is the most common used one. But of course, we have wet processing happening in Sri Lanka as well to a large extent now. And some people have actually tried and gone into honey processing as well. So all these processes keeps on adding value. Now, in a very normal scenario, it is considered that dry process is less quality, wet process is average or medium, and honey is the best. But again, we found, or in the world, we've seen exceptions on them. So in Brazil, there were certain coffees that were found to have better cupping scores when done with the dry process rather than the wet process, right? So again, there's a lot of parameters that you can play around it. But the important part is the processor has a huge role to play as well. Because if he or she does not process this correctly, then you can get the best cherries, but you can't get the next step out of it. And again, as I said before, you lose quality at one point of the value chain, you cannot recover it after that, right? The roaster can't recover the loss of the quality that happened during the processing stage. So it is very critical that the processor also actually cares for this and have the best practices. I mean, that's something that is very essential, right? When you do the dry process, you need to dry it with the natural sunlight. You can't put it into an industrial dryer and then expect the same results to be, right? But unfortunately, that's what we've seen happening a little in Sri Lanka recently. Some people actually put this into a dryer, just keep it at 8 hours inside a dryer and take it out. But well, for a commercial coffee, it's okay. But when you want to go to that next level, or when you are really concerned about the quality, when you want to take that specialty coffee layer, that's not going to work. So you need to have those best practices, both at the farmer level or the plucking or that laborer level, but of course at the processing level as well.
It's time to take a small coffee break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about this industry.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight we're talking with Kushan Samararatne, the chairman of Lanka Coffee Association. We're seeing coffee exports really rising in Sri Lanka, and with the rise of exports, of course, there will be demand for more volume and more value additions as well. But like you said, it's not an industry that's exactly structured in the traditional form of structure, right? So it's very different how it operates. So against this kind of background, do we really have what it takes to deliver on the increased volumes that are going to be required?
Yeah, so Rhonda, I think right now the biggest problem, yes, exports has been rising because a lot of people are now interested in exports. I mean, one of the main mandates even of our association is to promote exports. This is not us trying to, fulfill the requirement that we have locally. Sri Lanka is a small country, right? How many coffees are we going to drink a day, right? And whatever the investment we do or whatever the effort we put in simply cannot be looking at the local market only. It has to be looking at the bigger picture. If our pie locally is 50, think of the world, right? They're talking about 50,000, 500,000, 5 million sometimes. Right? So there's a huge pie that is out there. And coffee is a growing industry, right? It has a CAGR of 4.83. Specialty coffee has a CAGR of over 12%, right? So year on year, tea on the other hand is coming down, right? Even the global market, it is coming down. So coffee actually has a huge potential as well. To the question you raised, so the good thing is as plantation companies have started going into coffee, we are very hopeful that within the next 2 to 3 years, there will be volume that comes in, right? So at least it will help us to manage the local demand. But again, as I said, I think if we are very serious about exports, there's two ways. One is specialty coffee, right? Where pricing or the volumes are not the main factor that people are looking at. Because our labor is expensive, we have all the other costs that are very high, so we'll never be able to, it will be very difficult for us to compete on a commercial level coffee. So specialty coffee, that's one way. Or number two, value addition, right? So the moment you add value to this, let's say it can be convenience, it can be something else, right? You add, I don't know, flavors to your coffee, for example, right? That creates an entirely different market, a niche market, but an entirely different market. So if you look at the global picture, there are two types of coffee drinkers, purists and indulgers, right? So purists are the people who will only have a black coffee in the morning or at most a cappuccino, but nothing else, right? No flavors, nothing. Indulgers are more like the Gen Zs or the people who want to try new things. So they're happy to try a caramel cappuccino. They are happy to try maybe a coffee bag, something similar to a tea bag, because it gives a lot more convenience to you, right? So I think one market is, of course, we can go after the purist with the specialty coffees, but also after the indulgers, which is a picking up market, right? The trend is moving towards that now. So we can go after the indulgers with the value additions that we have. Now, the good part of this is that's going to answer some of the limitations that we have in terms of our volume, in terms of our consistency, in terms of our pricing. Those factors can be mitigated to a large extent if we were to use the specialty coffee aspect and the value addition in our exports. And that for a country like Sri Lanka is a nice way to think about it, because we can start creating an entirely different market segment rather than try and compete against the big boys like Brazil, Vietnam, or Indonesia on a commercial scale. Right? They have the economies of scale, they will just blow us out of the water. Right? We should not try and compete there, we should look at these other two aspects.
And Kushan, what would you say are the primary target markets for Ceylon coffee?
So I think we, again, as you said, our export markets are very small. Our exports as a whole is very small, but we actually have been exporting a lot towards the Middle Eastern countries, as well as European countries as well. And Australia, New Zealand is very big on coffee as well. I think the good part for us is we do not actually have to limit ourselves to one continent or one particular region, right? Coffee is the second most consumed beverage in the world, right? And that's a fact. So it means everyone in the world, after water, it's coffee, right? So everyone in the world is actually consuming a lot of coffee. So I don't think we have to limit our markets, but if we have to prioritize, again, as I said, it's specialty coffee or value added, right? So maybe we need to look at the higher markets or people who enjoy a special coffee, who are willing to spend that premium to get a good cup of coffee served. So it can be the European markets, Australian, but of course, Middle Eastern as well, Ron.
Last year, it was very exciting and interesting to see the Ceylon Coffee Festival take place for the second time. So what are the plans in the pipeline for this year in terms of events such as that?
Yeah, I mean, look, as you said, that was the second year we did, and we literally did not have enough room in our hall to cater to all the people that came in. We actually had to say sorry to some of the people who came in because it was so big, right? So I think that enthusiasm, that real hunger, that passion for coffee in Sri Lanka is growing by the day. So that's a really nice sign to see. And in terms of the projects that are on the pipeline, Ruwandi, again, as the association, our main focus is on promoting Sri Lankan coffee, right? And that's a mandate that we have taken very seriously because, for example, the government gets involved a lot now on coffee, which is a very good sign again. Department of Export Agri to some of the other EDB and plantation ministry, everyone gets involved a lot in coffee. But a lot of that work goes into the lower levels of the value chain, to the farmer, to the processor, which is absolutely needed, right? Because you don't have the product, what are you trying to sell, right? So what we've decided as the association is that it's our responsibility to promote Sri Lankan coffee, right? And that's why, of course, things like the coffee festival. So last year we did the first ever LCA Barista Championship, right? Again, the difference between a normal competition against this was we were using Sri Lankan coffee on our competition, even on the finals, right? So similarly, this year also, we will do the Barista Championship. We'll do the coffee festival as well, of course, at a much grander scale than what we did before, right? But also there are a few other programs in line with promoting coffee on the pipeline. Now, that doesn't mean that we will not go and work with the farmers, right? Because one aspect that we want is everyone in this value chain to be a part of our association. So our association is also unique because we have farmers in it, we have processors on it, we have the roasters on it, we have the marketeers on it, right? We have all the aspects covered inside the association itself, but it's important that we go into the farmer levels as well and share whatever that we see on an international scale. Right? So in that sense, this year we actually decided, hey, let's do a competition for the farmers as well. Yes, it's not our main point of focus, but we need to get the farmers involved in this as well. Right? The more the farmers starts to understand what's happening globally, what are the best practices, how can they improve their quality, right? That's where Sri Lankan coffee can really, really win. So we'll have the festival. We have a few other activities planned as well. A lot of training programs. We've already done a few this year. Together with the extension officers of the government as well. They've got very involved with other agencies like United Nations, European Union, then NIPM, National Institute of Plantation Management. So they are starting up a new course on the coffee cultivation and harvesting, which is a really good sign to see, right? It's something that Sri Lanka was crying for because we do not have proper expertise on coffee, right? Most of the guys who are doing coffee were guys who are doing tea before, right? It's just with that experience that they come in, that proper scientific background, that proper understanding is not there. So it's very important that and that's where the association gets involved as well, because it's always about promoting this industry, promoting Sri Lankan coffee to the world. And that's the main mandate of the association as well. And there's a lot on the pipeline, to cover that particular mandate.
Kushan, we're nearing the end of our discussion, but before we let you go, I need to ask you, you spoke of promoting Ceylon coffee, internationally, but if we look at how we can market it and brand it locally, how would you promote our coffee among Sri Lankans who will be the brand ambassadors of the product as well?
I think the first point is, look, I think most of us were raised in a culture where coffee was given either you're staying late or you have a stomachache, right? So I think that's the first conception that we need to break now, right? Coffee is not like that. If that's the case, I mean, look, you don't have to worry to have 4 or 5 cups a day, right? I mean, on some days we drink about 20 cups when we are cupping and when we want to taste. My trainer regularly drinks about 20 cups, right? I also drink 10, 15 cups a day at some days. I usually have about 5 cups a day. It's always about that conception that we have, right? So I think that's the first thing that I would encourage Sri Lankans is to try coffee. And when we say coffee, try the good varieties of it, right? So I'm not going to say any brands, right? Because it's not fair. All are coffee, yes, but just get the feeling that, there are different types of coffees. Go to a cafe. You go to a cafe, have a conversation with them. Ask them what's the coffee you are serving, right? Most of these baristas, they would actually have an understanding about the coffee they serve, not just the brand name, but, whether it's Arabica or Robusta, where it is coming from, what sort of a flavor profile you have. Just ask for a packet, read what's on the back side of it, right? There's a lot of information that is there. Get that in, right? Because coffee is a passion, right? You need to enjoy a cup of coffee. If you're not enjoying a cup of coffee, if you're just taking it on the rush, then instant coffee works for you. Yes, But we are not talking about instant coffee here, right? So I think that's the main thing I would encourage all Sri Lankans is not to be afraid to try coffee, right? We are so happy to have tea, but we are very afraid to have coffee. A lot of people say that if I have a coffee after 6 p.m., I'll not be able to sleep, right? No, that's not the case. Again, different, bodies can operate differently. I'm not saying it's not a valid point, but I think it's not on the psychology, right? Because I usually drink, even at 10 o'clock at night, I can sleep very well at 10:30, right? So it's sometimes about, breaking those perceptions as well, but it's always about, trying new things, right? You can be a purist, you can be indulgent. There's a lot of really good coffee, Sri Lankan really good coffee right now out there in the market, right? Don't be afraid to try them. We have this mindset, hey, if the coffee is from Italy or if the coffee is from Brazil, that's great. If it is Sri Lanka, oh, no, that's not the case, right? Even our coffee is really good. So I encourage everyone to try it out. Whenever you say it, you'll start enjoying it, trust me.
We've been talking with Kushan Samararatne, the chairman of Lanka Coffee Association. Kushan, it was lovely and such a delicious interview with you today.
Thanks, Ruwandi, and thank you again for the opportunity provided. It's not every day that coffee gets a main spot in anywhere in Sri Lanka, but I'm glad, and I think this speaks about the the trends that are changing even in Sri Lanka, right? Today we are at a stage where we are talking about coffee. 5 years ago, we probably would have only spoken about tea, right? So I think we are on the correct track. So thanks for LMDtv as well for providing us this opportunity.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.